Right, so I want to chat you through how to complete a grouped frequency table, how to calculate the mean from it and find your modal group, and then how to extend it further and draw your cumulative frequency curve to find your median and your interquartile range. This will be covered in weeks 1 and 2 in the Access and Maths module, and it will be covered in the first week and the beginning of the second week of the Statistics module. So if you missed any of them weeks, this is a good tutorial to watch. So we've got here a grouped frequency table. It's grouped because the categories are grouped. So we're looking at the number of hours of TV that people have watched over the space of a week. 150 people have took part in the survey, and the frequency then tells us how many people are on each category. So 2 people watched between 0 and 5 hours of TV. 18 people watched between 6 and 10 hours of TV, and so on and so on. Now, to do some calculations, what we've got to do is work out the midpoint, because knowing that these 2 people have watched between 0 and 5 hours of TV is too vague to be doing any kind of analysis on. So we work out the midpoint and we give that an average. We give each category an average. So to get the midpoint, you're going to add your 2 limits. So this here would be your lower limit, all these numbers on the left, and then the numbers here on the right are your upper limits. So that's your class limits. And what we do is we add the limits and then we divide by 2. So 0 plus 5 gives you 5, and 5 divided by 2 will give you 2.5. That's the first one. And then you'll do 6 plus 10 for 16 and half that, and you'll get 8. And then you'll add your 11 and your 15, and you'll have that, and you'll get 13. And then 16 plus your 20 for 36, half that, and you'll get 18. And then you'll see a pattern forming on there then as well. So the next one there is going to be 23, 28, 33, and 38. And you'll always have a pattern on your midpoints as long as there's a pattern flowing through your groups. Okay. The reason then, as I said, that we use these midpoints is now we're putting a value onto the number of hours of TV that these people watch. So we're saying these 2 people watched roughly 2.5 weeks of TV each. These 18 people have watched 8 hours of TV each, and so on. And we use these midpoints now to calculate the next column, the FX. Now FX is basically just F for frequency multiplied by your midpoint. So it's going to be your frequency column multiplied by your X column to give you the FX column. So we're multiplying these 2. So if we go down through there, then 2 times, I'll just change my color for this column. 2 times your 2.5, that's going to give you 5. 18 times 8 will give you 144. 22 multiplied by 13 will be 286. 44 times 18 will be 792. 41 times 23 will be 943. If we multiply 13 by 28, we're going to get 364. 7 times 33 will be 231. And then 3 times 38 is 114. So what we're saying now then, these 2 people who've watched 2.5 hours of TV, they've clocked up 5 hours between them. These 18 people who watched 8 hours of TV, they've clocked up 144 hours between them. So now we need to get a total of this FX column. And if we add these values all up, we should get 2,879. Now that represents the total number of hours spent watching TV, clocked up by the 150 people. All right. Before we go any further, what we can do is calculate a mean now straight away. And the mean, if we use the formula that we've seen in class, is the total of the FX column divided by the total of the frequency column. So that sigma, that's one of the Greek letters called sigma, and it just means the total or the sum of. So the total number of hours clocked up was 2,879. We had 150 people, that was the total frequency. So 2,879 divided by 150 will give us the 2 decimal places 19.19 hours. So that's our mean number of hours spent watching TV. Okay. What we can also calculate here now from the table, or we can find, is our modal group. And to find the modal group, we're just looking for the highest frequency value. So if we look for the highest frequency on the frequency column. Our highest frequency there is 44. 44 people spent between 16 and 20 hours watching TV. So the most amount of people, the highest frequency was in that category, 16 to 20 hours. Now that makes sense because we always want the mean, the modal group and the median to be fairly similar. 19.19 hours fits into that category of 16 to 20 hours. When we find our other missing average, the median, then it should hover around these values as well. So to get the median, we're looking at the next two columns then. CF means cumulative frequency. So CF is cumulative frequency, okay? If you accumulate stuff, then you're gathering it. So cumulative frequency is a gathering of your frequencies. So I'm going back to this frequency column here now to calculate my cumulative frequency. We've got these 150 people to sort out. If we ask everybody who's watched between 0 and 2 and 5 hours of TV to come forward, then 2 people are going to come forward. So far we can account for 2 people. If we ask anybody then who's watched between 6 and 10 hours of TV to come forward, we've got 18 people. So we're going to gather them with the 2 people we've already got. So we're going to add on these 18. So 2 plus the 18 will bring us up now to 20. By the time we bring in our next category, the number of people who watch between 11 and 15 hours of TV, we've got an extra 22 people now. If we add them on to the 20 we've got so far, then we've got 42. So this is basically a running total of your frequency column. We had the 2, we added on the 18 to get 20, we add on the 22 to get 42, we'll add on this 44 now and it'll bring us up to 86. We'll add on these 41, it'll bring us up to 127. We'll add on the next 13, we're up now at 140. We'll add on the next 7, so it's 147, and we'll add on the last 3, so that's the 150 people. You always want your last value on your cumulative frequency column to match the total of your frequency column. It just means now that you have accounted for everyone. So that cumulative frequency is basically a running total of your frequency column. Okay. And then the last column on here now, we need this, the upper boundaries. And the reason why we need it is because if we look back at these groups, there's no overlap in the groups. The first group ends at 5 and the second group starts at 6. Now there's numbers between 5 and 6, you have 5.1, 5.2, 5.3 and so on. So what we're looking for is what's the maximum amount of hours of TV that we let somebody watch in this category before we round up and say, well, they watch closer to 6 hours of TV than 5. And all we've got to do there to get that upper boundary is to add a half on to each of these upper limits. So what we're saying is we'll let people watch TV up to 5.5 hours of TV. Any more than that, we'll round them up and we'll put them on the next column. The upper boundary then for the second category, we'll let them watch up to 10.5 hours of TV. For the third category, we'll let them watch up to 15.5 hours of TV. And that's all we're doing, adding on that 0.5 to each of the upper limits. The only time you'll do that is when you don't have overlap in your categories. So had my category, if it had the less than or equal to signs, if we had maybe say time was greater than 0 hours, but less than or equal to 5 hours, and if the next category started at the time was greater than 5 hours, if we had that overlap, then our upper boundary would just be exactly the same as the upper limits. Because we've got overlap, we know the maximum amount of time that you can spend watching TV in each category. But because this originally didn't have that overlap, then we go ahead and we add on 0.5 to the upper class limits. Okay. Now we've got 2 pieces of analysis done. We've got the mean and we've got the modal group from the earlier parts of the table. To find the missing 2 pieces of analysis, so to find the median and to find the interquartile range, we have to look at these 2 columns here now. The CF column along with this upper boundary. And it's these 2 columns that we're going to plot on the chart next to show the cumulative frequency curve. So we're going to plot the CF curve. Across the x-axis, that's always going to be your variable, so that's going to be the time. We're actually going to plot our upper boundary. That's going to be our x-coordinate, if you like. Okay. I wouldn't label it as upper boundary, I would just label it as time in hours, but just remember that it's the upper boundary that you're plotting. And then on the y-axis, that's going to be your cumulative frequency. So we're moving across to this value on the x-axis and moving up this value on the y-axis. So I've got the grid set up on the next page, and I'm just going to plot what we have highlighted here in blue. I'm going to plot that now on this curve. So we're all set up. Titles on there, cumulative frequency curve showing the time spent watching TV. We've got the time across the x-axis, time in hours across there. It's going in a nice continuous scale. It started at 0, it's going across in 5, so every one of these is worth 1. So that'll be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and so on right up to 45. And then if we look at the y-axis, then this one's going in 20s, 20, 40, 60, 80. So each one of these intervals on the way up is going to be worth 4. So that'll be 4, 8, 12, 16, 20. Not the most user-friendly scale, but we'll manage it for this. So remember, I'm plotting the last 2 columns on this graph now. Now I've made a note of these on a different page, so I don't have to keep scrolling on the computer here. So the first one that I have to plot then, I'm going to move across to 5.5 on my x-axis, and I'm going to move up to a cumulative frequency of 2. So if that's 5 and that's 6, then 5.5 is just going to be here in the middle. And if I have to move up a cumulative frequency of 2, remember the first interval there is worth 4, I only have to move up 2, so I'm going to have to plot just there in the middle. So I've come across 5.5 and I've moved up 2. The next one now is to move across 10.5, so there's 10.5 and move up 20. The next one then is to go across 15.5 and up to 42, that's 40, there's 42. 20.5 was up to 86, so 20.5, 24, or 86 would be there. 25.5 across and up to 127. There's 120, 124, 128, so 127 at 25.5 would be roughly there. 30.5 was right up at 140. 35.5 was right up at 147. So we're up in here. And then finally 40.5 was up as high as 150. And that's everybody accounted for then. 40.5 up at 150, we'll go there. So I've plotted each of the coordinates. And what you want to do now, freehand, is just to join them to make a nice smooth curve. Now I'll do my best on here, but this wee graphics pad wouldn't be the easiest to use. Okay, if you're drawing this on a page, I would just advise you to keep the pencil on the page and not lift it. But on this graphics pad, I'm having to lift it every so often. Okay, so that's your cumulative frequency curve. All right, freehand sketch, you don't want to join them together with a ruler or anything like that. So the missing information now is the median and the interquartile range. To find the median, we're going to use the formula that we were using in class. We'd have 150 people in this wee survey, so it's quite a good substantial amount of people. So for us to find the median's always in the middle, halfway in. So it's going to be n divided by 2. N, the amount of people, or your total frequency, the amount of people who took part in the survey. We had 150 people. Divide that by 2 is going to give us 75. So we're looking now for the 75th value. If we had all these people, all these 150 people lined up in order of who watched the least TV up to who watched the most TV, then the 75th person is the person in the middle. So to find 75, remember this scale's going in 4, so that's 64, 68, 72, 76. So 75 is just going to be a wee fraction under that line at 76. So I'll call that the 75th person. Now, if you're using the page, just maybe it's attached to an email, you'll need a ruler for this part. So you're going to draw straight across from 75, or that point at 75. Oops. Let me just do that again. You want to draw a straight line across. No, it's not letting me do it this time. I'm just having a wee look to see why it's not working this time. There we go. So that's my line sitting there as close to 75 as I can get it. I'll just make it red so it stands out a wee bit better. I've gone across from 75 until I meet my curve. As soon as I meet my curve, I've stopped, and now I want to drop a line straight down from there. Okay. And now I'm just going to label that. So that line represents my median, because it was the 75th person. And the amount of time that they've spent watching TV is just here. So that's 15. That would have been 19. So 19 and a half, because it's between 19 and 20. So I'm going to say 19.5 hours, which makes sense because if you remember, our mean value was 19.19 and our modal group was between 16 and 20. So the mean, the median and the mode are all fairly similar, and that's what you want. If we look now for our interquartile range, we're going to have to find our lower quartile and our upper quartile. So the lower quartile then, or Q1 as we've been calling it, lower quartile Q1 is going to be n divided by 4. It's divided by 4 this time because we're talking about quartiles, which breaks your information into quarters. So we had 150 people. If we divide that by 4, we're going to get 37.5. So we're looking for the 37.5 value. Again, on a scale going in 4s, it's not ideal, but we'll get as close to that as possible. I'll just get a wee line ready to insert it. 24, 28, 32, 36, so it's just going to be above that 36. And again, I'll go across just to meet my CF curve. And I'll change this colour to green. And then I'll drop a line straight down from where I meet my curve. And we're sitting around there now. Okay, I'll just label that one as well. So that's my lower quartile, my Q1, because that would have been the 37.5 person. 37.5 person doesn't exist. But if we had the line of people in front of us, we would go to the 37th and the 38th person, people, and find their average. So our value here is looking like 14.5 hours. Okay, so that was my lower quartile. And now to find my upper quartile, the Q3, the upper quartile. The formula for your upper quartile is very similar to your lower quartile. The only difference is you need to multiply it by 3 because it's going to be 3/4 of the way into your data. Your lower quartile is 1/4 of the way in. Your median's halfway or 2/4 of the way in. So your upper quartile has to be 3/4 of the way into your data. So your upper quartile is always going to be 3 times the place of your lower quartile. So 3 times 37.5 is going to give us 112.5. So that's the value we're looking for now, 112.5. So I'll get my line ready again, or the ruler, and go as close as I can to 112. So that's 104, 108, 112. So I'm just going to go ever so slightly above that line of 112 for 112.5. Cross to meet the curve, and then drop a line straight down. So we've got the person, and now we know how much time they've spent watching TV. Again, I'll put a wee label on that. So that's going to be my Q3. And the amount of time that they've spent, Q3 would have been the 112.5 person. And the number of time they've spent, there's 20, 21, 22, 23, let's just say 23.5 hours. Okay. Now the purpose of finding Q1 and Q3, your upper and lower quartile, is for you to calculate your interquartile range, which is the difference between the two of them. So it's your upper quartile, 23.5, and take away your lower quartile, 14.5. And we've got a difference there of 9 hours. So the person in the upper quartile position has watched TV for 9 hours more than the person sitting in the lower quartile. Just for a matter of fact as well, your median is always going to be your Q2, your second quartile. All right. Now that's the full analysis for a cumulative frequency question. You're given your table and you're asked to do your full analysis, find your mean, median, mode, and an interquartile range. I can't find the regular range here where I would take away the highest and the lowest, because although I know 3 people watched up to 40 hours of TV, I don't know what was that maximum number, and just likely I don't know, or likewise I don't know what's the minimum amount of time that these 2 people or whoever watched the least amount of TV, I don't know that smaller value. So I'm not calculating the regular range, highest, take away, lowest. I have to rely on my interquartile range. So to recap, your midpoint is when you add your limits and then half it. The midpoint then becomes your estimated variable. So 2 people watched 2.5 hours of TV each, they've clocked up 5 hours. Your fx is multiplying your f column by your x column, the frequency by the midpoint. Cumulative frequency is a running total of your frequency column. You're constantly adding on one value at a time, and the last figure in your cumulative frequency column should always be your total frequency, the 150 again, or whatever your total frequency was. And then your upper boundary, in this case the upper boundary was a half more than the upper limits because there was no overlap. If there was overlap, you don't need to add on the 0.5. When you've got your table complete, you can calculate your mean by using your formula, the sum of your fx column divided by the sum of the frequency. So these 150 people clocked up 2,879 hours of TV. So the mean was 19.19. To find your modal group, we were looking for the highest frequency value, which was in this category, 16 to 20. And then to find your your median and your IQR, we had to plot the curve using the last 2 columns. So we plotted the curve and then we found the median, the person in the middle. Because there was 150 people, the person in the middle was the 75th person. And when we meet them on the CF curve, they've watched 19.5 hours of TV. And then to find the interquartile range, you have to find your lower and your upper quartiles. Find those 2 people and read off how much time they've spent watching TV and subtract the amount of hours spent watching TV. That's a full set of analysis done then.